Take a look at this town. Empty parking lots, boarded up storefronts, rows of abandoned trailers out in the North Dakota wind. It looks like a place the modern world forgot. But a few years ago, this was one of the fastest growing towns in America because it is sitting on top of an ocean of oil. Williston, North Dakota, sits directly above one of the largest oil discoveries in United States history. Billions of barrels of crude locked in the rock beneath the open prairie. At its peak, this quiet corner of North Dakota was pumping more than 1 million barrels of oil every single day and pulling in workers from all 50 states. Then, almost as fast as it arrived, the boom emptied out again. So how did an ordinary farming region become the center of America's biggest oil rush in a generation? And why are billions of barrels still sitting down there, waiting, even now? Start with the sheer scale of what is buried here. The oil sits in a rock layer called the Bakken, spread across western North Dakota, part of eastern Montana, and up over the border into Canada. For most of the last century, geologists knew the oil was there. They simply had no way to get it out. Then the estimates started climbing. By 2008, a government survey concluded that the Bakken held billions of barrels of oil that could actually be recovered, one of the largest such finds ever assessed in the lower 48 states. A few years later, that number was raised even higher. Almost overnight, North Dakota, a state most Americans never think about, became the second biggest oil producer in the entire country, behind only Texas. It passed Alaska. It passed California. Within a few years, its output blew past 1 million barrels a day and kept climbing toward 1.5 million. And the flares from all that drilling grew so bright that from space at night, the empty prairie lit up like a major city. So how did we get here? The story starts back in 1951, when a crew drilling near the small town of Tioga struck the first oil ever produced in North Dakota. It set off a modest boom, and it gave the rock layer beneath the state its name, borrowed from a local farmer named Henry Bakken, whose land sat right on top of it. But that first boom faded within a decade. The easy wells dried up or proved too costly, and for the next half-century, North Dakota was treated as an oil afterthought, a cold and empty place that had missed its moment while Texas and the Gulf Coast took over. And there was a deeper problem, one that would define North Dakota oil for 50 years. The Bakken is what geologists call a tight formation. The oil is not sitting in an open pool that you can simply pump to the surface. It is trapped inside dense, hard rock, spread thin through layers that refuse to give it up. For decades, drillers knew a fortune was down there, and they watched most of it stay locked in the ground, out of reach. That changed when two technologies arrived at the same time. The first was horizontal drilling, the ability to bore straight down and then turn the drill sideways to run through a thin layer of oil-bearing rock for miles. The second was hydraulic fracturing, pumping fluid down at high pressure to crack the rock open and let the oil flow. On their own, each was useful. Together, they unlocked the Bakken. In the early 2000s, a field just across the border in Montana, called Elm Coulee, quietly proved the method worked, pulling hundreds of millions of barrels out of rock the industry had written off. Once the rest of the world saw the proof, drillers poured across the North Dakota line by the thousands. The state exploded. But why was there so much oil trapped in that rock in the first place? For that answer, you have to go back around 360 million years ago. Back then, this part of North America was a very different world. A vast, shallow, inland sea covered the entire region. That sea was full of tiny marine life, and as those organisms died, they drifted down and collected on the seafloor in thick beds of dark, organic mud. Over millions of years, more sediment piled on top, pressing that mud down and sealing it deep underground. Heat and pressure slowly cook the organic material into oil and natural gas. The Bakken is really 3 layers stacked together. The dark shale on the top and bottom is the source, the kitchen where the oil was made. The middle layer is the reservoir that trapped it, and directly below the Bakken sits another oil-soaked layer called the Three Forks, which drillers later realized held even more crude than they first believed. Add it all up, and by some estimates, the rock under North Dakota holds hundreds of billions of barrels of oil in total, enough to dwarf entire countries. The catch has always been that only a thin sliver of it can ever be pumped to the surface. The rest stays locked in stone 2 miles straight down. The reason it stayed hidden so long is simple. This oil never pooled into the easy underground lake that early drillers chased. It stayed locked inside the rock that made it, waiting for the technology to catch up. That day finally came, and the race was on. What happened next was one of the wildest economic rushes in modern American history. Word spread that there was serious money in North Dakota, and people came from everywhere. Williston sat right at the center of it. A town of a few thousand people suddenly had to make room for tens of thousands of new arrivals, and there was nowhere to put them. Workers slept in their trucks. They slept in tents in the snow. Entire villages of temporary housing, known as man camps, sprang up across the prairie to hold the flood of laborers. Rent went insane. For a stretch, a small apartment in this remote farm town cost more than one in New York City or San Francisco. That is not a typo. A patch of frozen prairie, more expensive than Manhattan. The parking lot of the local Walmart filled with campers and RVs belonging to people who had good jobs, but no home. Fast food restaurants, desperate for staff, offered signing bonuses just to get someone behind the counter. And the money was real. A truck driver, willing to work brutal hours, could pull in 6 figures. Farmers who happened to own the right patch of land signed leases that made them millionaires almost overnight without ever touching a drill. For a few years, North Dakota had one of the lowest unemployment rates and one of the fastest growing economies anywhere in the nation. Men left their families in other states to fly in, work 2 weeks straight, and fly home again. Some made small fortunes, others drank it away in bars that stayed open around the clock. The town never really slept, but a boom like that comes with a cost. The small town could not keep up. Roads built for tractors were torn apart by heavy trucks. Police forces, schools, and hospitals were stretched far past their limits. Crime climbed sharply, and a once sleepy farm community suddenly felt tense and crowded and dangerous. It was, by every measure, a modern gold rush. Except this time the gold was oil, and it was buried 2 miles beneath the frozen ground. The whole thing had the frantic energy of something that could not possibly last, and it didn't. In late 2014, the price of oil began to fall. Then it collapsed. A barrel that had sold for around $100 dropped to under $30, and the entire Bakken economy, built on expensive, high-tech drilling, suddenly stopped making sense. Drilling rigs that had covered the horizon were packed up and hauled away. Companies laid off thousands of workers, many of them overnight. The man camps began to empty. The people who had bet everything on the boom, who had bought trucks and houses and businesses at the very top of the market, watched the bottom fall out from under them. Most of them left the way they came, leaving behind the half-abandoned streets and silent trailer lots you can still see today. Then in 2020, a second price crash hit and drove the whole industry down all over again. There is one more strange detail to this story, and you can see it from orbit. For years, North Dakota produced so much natural gas alongside its oil that companies simply burned a lot of it off because there were not enough pipelines to carry it away. That flaming gas, worth a fortune, lit up the night sky so brightly that satellite images of the dark northern plains showed a glowing patch of light where no big city exists at all. A fortune in fuel, literally going up in flames, because nobody had built the pipelines to catch it. And this is the part that matters most. The Bakken did not just transform one state. Together with the shale fields of Texas, it helped push the United States past Saudi Arabia and Russia to become the largest oil producer on earth, and it cut America's dependence on foreign oil to levels not seen in decades. The oil never left. North Dakota is still one of the top producing states in the country, and the Bakken still holds billions of untouched barrels. The boom and the bust emptied the towns, but they barely scratched what is down there. The deeper, tighter layers, the ones too expensive to reach last time, are all still sitting in the dark, waiting. Which brings us back to Williston and those quiet, half-empty streets. It is easy to look at a boarded-up boomtown and assume the story is finished, but that would be a mistake. This is a place that has already boomed, crashed, and come roaring back more than once in its history, every time the price was right and the technology was ready. The billions of barrels beneath the North Dakota prairie are still there, confirmed, mapped, and waiting. The only real question is when the world decides it needs them badly enough. Because when that day comes, this forgotten corner of America could roar back to life all over again.